Yeah. And it's recording too.
Thanks.
There you go. And it's recording too. I don't know if that's going to be annoying.
I'm just playing back.
Hold on 1 second, because it's yeah. And it's
What do I do? Just turn on the sound when it starts?
Yeah. No, you don't have to do anything. Basically, that was playing the live stream.
Hello, Xiong. I got a couple of people there. Are you muted or unmuted? All right, there's William, and then we got Ching, Kin. How you doing, Bill?
Good, how are you?
You know, like everybody else, wondering what day it is.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, the upside of working on a project and having deadlines is that you keep the deadlines in your mind, you know?
You have to know what day it is.
Yeah, actually, there's the projects I'm working on. I set every 2 weeks with one client, every 3 weeks with another client on the same day at the same time. And it's my calendar,
Yeah.
you know, and then there's, yeah, I got 3 projects that are very active right now. Same thing. One guy is once every Thursday morning, once a week. Somebody else is, anyways, yeah, I just set times and it keeps everybody on our team focused, including me. That's the biggest focus.
Is your staff all working remotely?
Yeah. Yeah. Periodically, I'm really the only one that comes into my office, and my administrative coordinator comes in a couple of times a week. But I like being here. It's a big space, and I'm the only one here. Yeah.
Quiet?
Oh yeah, it's nice. And then if I'm, depending upon what I'm doing, I can turn on music really loud or very soft. Yeah. And then it echoes through the space. Anyways, that's, yeah, it's I think it's gonna be this way for, I don't know, because I'd like to say another 3 to 4 months, but I think it's gonna be longer.
Ooh.
Yeah. All right, so let's see who else. Stephen Phillips is there. There's Ferris. Ferris, thanks for your help yesterday with.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah. You know,
I'm glad everything's working.
Well, the thing is, all of, you know, your generation, all of you, this is sort of natural, you know. For me, it's still a concept. Yeah.
I don't know. There's still a lot that we have to figure out.
There's a lot that I guess all of these companies are having to figure out because of the not only the amount of use, but how robust they have to make these systems, but how flexible and portable they have to make these systems. You know?
Yeah, definitely.
Like Zoom was a huge leveling up over everything else. You know, Skype and GoToMeeting. You know, all of that.
Yeah. Everyone just kind of adopted Zoom.
Yeah. Hi, Stephen.
Michael, nice to see you.
I like your background there.
I'm in my building. How you been?
I'm good. I'm good.
You're in your library.
I'm in my library. I am. I've got it's crazy. I keep buying books. Some people have an addiction to shoes. I got an addiction to books and hats. Yeah. And I guess I'll read them. I'll have a lot of time after I die because I'm going to retire 2 years after I die.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that's when I'm going to read. Yeah.
Not so many people read anymore. Kind of tragic.
I had there's a friend of mine who's reads very, very fast. He was profoundly autistic for many years, and then he became an exceptional scholar when he discovered philosophy and the way he could think. Anyways, we have conversations every 2 weeks, and he reads the oddest things. He just finished writing a book called What is Human. He's written about 20 books.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. But anyways, he turned me on to termites 3 years ago, and then to trees, and then to birds, and now butterflies. So we had a long conversation yesterday about butterflies. 200 million years they've been on the planet, and humans are definitely the top of the food chain. We're definitely not the top of whatever other chain would measure, higher intelligence. Yeah. But 200 million years, I had no idea. So that's my newest area of research is birds. Is butterflies. Okay, where's our? Do we have our critics yet? Besides me and you.
I'm here. There's Dwayne. Dwayne's
Coy's here. Dwayne's here. All right, cool.
And I'm here, Helen Kongsgaard.
Hi, Helen. How are you?
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, Helen.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Stephen. Hi, Helen.
Hey, Stephen.
How are we doing?
Helen, do you teach at SCI-Arc, or are you?
Me?
Yeah, I should know everybody, but I don't.
That's okay. I will likely teach a studio or seminar next year at SCI-Arc. I've been teaching at RISD the past few years, UCLA.
Nice.
I'm an urban designer and landscape architect.
We need some of those at SCI-Arc for sure. Yeah. All right. So we're waiting for Eric Owen. Hey, Dwayne, you already go out for your coffee this morning?
Yeah, we got it.
Oh, there it is.
Did you see me out there doing that?
No, I didn't. I missed you this morning. Normally, Dwayne and I see each other as he's walking along Hyperion with his coffee, sometimes with his kids, sometimes with Jenny,
People.
Sometimes they're engrossed in some deep conversation, so I don't disturb them by honking my horn,
We call that morning outing our corporate meeting.
Yeah. So it's either coffee or hardware. Those are the two intersections with Dwayne. Yeah. We have a really wonderful hardware store in our neighborhood. It's family owned since 1959. You go in there and everything is loose, which is much different than Home Depot. Dwayne knows where everything is too. I can ask him, hey, Dwayne, I'm looking for this kind of screw. He walks right there, just like he's been working there for years. It's amazing.
People often ask the employees where things are, and the employees don't know, and so I show them.
So they ask you.
What neighborhood do you live in?
We're in Silver Lake.
Yeah, it's Silver Lake. Yeah. Yeah. One of the great things, not great things, but one of the surprising things about the downside. The upside of the downside is all of the tables from restaurants that are out on the street now. Parking lots, streets. This is the way Los Angeles should be, but it's very difficult prior to this time to get permits to dine outside. And now it's just really great to see everybody putting tables and chairs outside.
Yeah, I agree. It's good to see Barbarix brings life back to the street.
Yeah, it does.
They just did it last week.
Yeah. They should keep it that way. The parking lot is so small, it doesn't make any difference if they have it, but it makes a big difference for a patio.
I actually think they probably could because of their covenant on the baller parking lot. that's how it worked. Is they cut a deal with Oyler to allow for parking.
Yeah. So let's see. Eric, are you here yet? All right. So.
Do we need to wait for Eric?
Nah. Yeah. He might
I can just do my impersonation the whole time.
Okay. All right. You can argue with yourself. Argue with Eric too. Yeah. Okay. So we got the miniatures was 10 minutes. I think they went about 15. Everybody here has 20 minutes. So why don't we have whatever critics are here? Why don't we just briefly introduce yourself, so I don't. Hey, there's Coy. So Stephen.
Oh.
So for the help for the students, tell them,
My name is Stephen Phillips. I'm an architect and historian, theorist kind of person. Written a few books. I put out a book on what I call the LA10 on Coy and Michael and company and Eric a while ago. Also, I'm a practitioner and build. Actually, we're doing mostly housing these days. It's been kind of fun and it's starting to get real. This is like a project in San Francisco we did.
Nice.
The Cal Poly LA Metro program for Cal Poly San Luis Obispo here in LA, and I taught at SCI-Arc for a very long time.
One thing that the students, this would be my interpretation of Stephen, besides him being a polymath, which they'll have to look that word up. The old term used to be Renaissance man, but it's Renaissance person now. He knows a lot of subjects. But anyways, he didn't want to live in San Luis Obispo. He decided he wanted to live in Los Angeles. So he invented a program and a life. Right now, when you look at periods like this is a period like it was pre-Renaissance when they had the plague, they had a number of wars, and then boom, out comes. This is great time. This is great cover for inventors. No one can say you have to inherit a life. It'd be impossible to inherit a life because everything is so radically different. So all of the students, after you finish this project, you're going to be inventing a life, and that's the great news. Okay, Helen.
Sure. I'm a landscape architect and urban designer. I do primarily public realm design and projects for climate adaptation and coastal resilience. I studied at Harvard and ran a research lab there for a number of years before joining the faculty at RISD, and just came out to California this last year, originally from Northern California. And I've been teaching at UCLA, and we'll be teaching in the EDGE programs at SCI-Arc next year, probably in the spring.
Nice. Welcome to
Thank
the
you.
family.
Looking forward to seeing the work.
Yeah.
What you guys are up to.
Yeah, every year we're always interested in seeing the work, see what we're up to. So, okay, and we got Coy.
Oh.
He doesn't need any introduction, but
I'm here, been here.
Is that a cadet hat or a ball cap?
Oh, it's just a ball cap.
Okay. And then
no introduction at all?
Oh, maybe for Helen's sake. Coy, we'd be here for like 2 hours. Coy's introduction.
Version.
He's one of the great teachers of all time, I think. And
thank you, Michael.
Among other things, So somebody who says, there's some people that say things that I imagine I had thought before I heard them for the first time. He's one of those guys, So do we have any other, Dwayne, we got Dwayne, everybody knows Dwayne, but all the students know Dwayne. Helen, you know Dwayne? Yeah, you do, because you said hello. Dwayne is my neighbor. That's all you need to know. Yeah.
I thought it was just a helper at Ballard.
Now I know where to go to the hardware store in Silver Lake. That's all that matters.
That's what I'm best at.
Yeah. It is an old fun hardware. It's a fun place to go. Okay, now I see Eric pop up. Mr. Moss.
Oh, baby.
Okay, that's his introduction. All right. So first up, we have on here it says Shengxing, but I think
I share my screen.
Okay.
Yeah, my my thesis topic is the reconstruction of the building. So this is my statement. The project location from the Los Angeles downtown for this building, near the Staples Center. For this is the Staples Center, and this building is around in the building. Yeah, we need I need to design the new building here. This is around in the building for the forward. And internal structure and detail. The old building, the detail. And it is standing there for flower plan. And it's a size model. Yeah, so for this is old building, and this is a new building, the material. The function is for this is hotel, this is apartment, and this is a shopping mall. Yeah, it's this is a diagram. Yeah, for the geometry of the building come from the surrounding the building. For this and this is and this G-formal. And the facade detail, the parts adjust the space and the angle according to the internal function space. And for this the detail can to rotation angle and move space size. Yeah, this is all.
So, Xiong, you're saying that those panels move laterally and then they rotate as well?
Yeah. For okay. This, you can to rotate angle and the move. Yeah, if for this inside is a living room or the bedroom to move the space size.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's for privacy and for sunlight. Okay. Is that it?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. Why are you doing this? What's the main big idea that you're motivated to explore?
Yeah, so the idea just the formal from the surrounding the building.
Okay, go on, Helen. I want to just open up for questions because I'll ask questions.
Do you have a plan, or are you only showing us the images?
Do you have a plan or sections?
Yeah, new plans, no, but have old plans here. These okay. Old building plans.
It's pretty hard to know where to jump in on this.
Yeah.
Because you kind of, just in terms of the way you presented it, you sort of said, here's the existing building, which is half the work you're showing us. And then here's the new thing and the windows move. The point of the thesis is that there's a larger idea guiding what you're up to. And even when those are weaker, we can often latch on to what one of the more interesting elements of it is. But in this case, you're kind of lacking both. So I think you're going to need to give us a little more so we know how to help you.
So what Dwayne is asking.
Way to, oh, sorry.
Oh, go on, Eric.
Another way to put this, if you make this demand on yourself, is to say, what's the purpose of the architecture in this case? Why is there an old building? Why is there a new building? Why did we start with this building? Is there something sacrosanct about the building? Is it in a special place? Does it have a special purpose? And then the program, I think you have to address to some extent. And I think particularly in light of if this is supposed to be a contemporary project, this is SCI-Arc's first opportunity to deal with a world that has apparently, at least in the short term, very different constraints and very different obligations and very different, if nothing else, very different commercial meanings. In other words, when you start talking about things like retail, or you start talking about housing, or you start talking about office buildings, there are very different pressures now. And you're making this project, and you can do this, but then I think you should probably say so, but you're making a project which programmatically seems to belong to something that at least temporarily has gone out of vogue. I think one of the really interesting challenges, I don't say there's a conventional answer, but there is an obvious question. I say this to Mike. I did a couple of days ago a review with Stephen, and it was really strange in a different way, because the students all knew exactly what architecture was. They all made watercolor drawings like he does, and they did buildings that look like his buildings, which is, and this is going the other way.
Yeah.
In the sense that I think there's some fascinating questions. It's not so much that you would answer them in a determinate way, but you at least raise the possibility. What happens to a building if it's got to be COVID proof? What happens to retail when nobody goes there? What happens to office buildings when people, at least for the moment, don't seem to have a hell of a lot of interest in office buildings? So why are we building office buildings? And if we're building them, are we building them in a way which at least forecasts a different kind of way of using them or inhabiting them or moving through them or using the space in them? If it's wide open space, which seemed to be fashionable for a very long time, maybe as an argument for 100 years already. And now the argument seems to be different. So again, I think it's in SCI-Arc's interest and students' interest to interrogate those issues. And so we have to, at least that's what I would say. Otherwise, it's a very conventional project programmatically. And as a concept of old and new, it doesn't really address the meaning of the old building, the relationship of the new building. How do you build that thing? I mean, somebody asked for a plan. How do you hold it up? In other words, are you saying the new structure is held up and there's some kind of integration with the old structure and new structural system? What the hell are you doing? Floor heights, very different arguments now in terms of volume of space. I mean, the curtain wall maybe gets some credit for being clever in a dexterity sense, but in terms of the natural flow of air conditioning, I mean, there are arguments in these buildings that every guy that goes up in these buildings needs her or his own stairway and elevator. I got in an elevator the other day, nobody else gets in the elevator. And one person in the elevator, it's a high rise. and somebody comes on the 14th floor and sees you in the elevator and doesn't get in. So, I mean, we can see that day to day. So I would be interested in seeing at least a few of those subjects addressed.
Xing, do you understand what they're asking?
Yeah, and yeah, I understand some. Yeah, I marked some information.
Yeah. So this is all recorded, but you know, the basic question is, at the urban scale, why this location?
Yeah.
Why this many people in this location?
Yeah.
And then you put something old, something new on top of something old. That has aesthetic implications, but it also has structural. How do you hold that up? And I think these are all important, because that's when you begin to, you have to draw the sections and the plans, and those become very interesting studies. And then what Eric is bringing up, which is on all of our mind, even though you start the thesis, and this is going to be for many of you, you start the thesis before we have the COVID issues, you can at least talk about those now. All right, many empty office buildings, nobody's going into stores, you know, etc. How do you begin to think about that? You're not going to solve it, but how do you begin to think about that? This is not only important for this project, it's important for you to begin to think about this for your future. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
One other way to look at this, Mike, which might be conceptually of interest. If you said, okay, what Michael just said to you is, okay, you started the project and there was no COVID, or there were rumors of COVID, or whatever the rumors were, the consequence of that weren't clear. I'm not sure they're clear now. So you had a project and you were building a conventional piece. And then suddenly in the middle of the project, and this is happening to us, it's literally happening. And in the middle of the project, you find out, wait a minute, maybe this is not the project, in which case it's conceivable this could be understood as step one, the nostalgia step. That premise we didn't really establish. And step two is the what I thought retail and office and housing used to be before I learned step three is COVID, which may mean, I don't know if the 3 steps are lateral or the 3 steps are vertical, or whether there's some kind of chronology for that. Maybe the latest one shows up on top. So you're really building 3 stages of a project. You're building the 1930s or whatever that thing is stage. And then you're building the more contemporary nostalgia stage, which is anywhere from 1950 to 2015. And now you're building the COVID, which is 2020 to who knows what. And they're all radically different from one another. Maybe that would be another way to look at it.
And maybe I can just, you know, I feel your pain to the student in that trying to design a highly densified apartment, housing, hotel, mall for the next 4+ years is a problem, right? It's a problem for Los Angeles and the density issues of Los Angeles. It's a problem in so many ways, as Eric's pointed out. The irony is, even if it was a real project, how do you design for post-COVID, which could be 2 years from now? It could be a new pandemic coming in the future, we don't know. How do we learn from the present pandemic, knowing that, yes, we will probably get ourselves a vaccine in a couple years. We probably will be back to a more densified downtown Los Angeles movement again. You know, we survived the Spanish flu, we will survive COVID. But to me, still also, that's something you could work with. You could contemplate how your elevators work. Are they on the outside? Do they have air somehow? Or there's different ways in which you could design this building. But I think some of the other fundamental problems, which I think were pointed out from the beginning, is you try to make these arguments. This is a normative conventional building because the neighborhood's normative and conventional. You basically said your building gets its geometry from the surrounding buildings, which are rectangles. I don't know if that's a viable argument or not. It's a statement, but a lot of buildings are rectangles. So I don't know if that makes it contextual or non-contextual. You have your cool, you did two things really. I mean, three things. One, you put your building on top of another building. You came up with a specific program to mix three types of programs. And four, you did a facade element. And those three things have to have a point that you kind of have to drive a little further, which seems questionable at present. Why do the facade elements need to change so someone inside can change their rooms so they can open up maybe to have air? You could make that argument to counter Eric, but then also is everything the same? It's very self-similar. So that's a typology. There's a density problem. So I think you have three elements. You have to kind of, when you begin your project to discuss it with us, pose your points and why they're relevant. And you can counter arguments about COVID if you want to, kind of the way I just said, or you can also jump in and try to manage it in an intelligent way. It's not impossible. You might argue though that a mall makes no sense today. So maybe housing, we do need more housing, but do we need more housing downtown in a dense building? Maybe if all the windows are open, maybe if there's a new hallway system so that I actually can get in and out in a very interesting way. It's not impossible to do that. Yeah.
Interesting, Stephen, when you're talking about the shape, the conventional shape of the building, Eric was mentioning as well. I began to think about what shape would you make it and how open would the facades be in order to increase the amount of wind that goes through the building? You know, yeah.
That could be a design strategy.
Well, the thing is, you got to be inventive when you're trying to solve problems that we don't have any solutions yet for, you know, and I think probably not enough time to do those kinds of studies, but I think Xiong, some of the things that are being said, you can still address those in your thesis. Do you have any questions, Xiong?
No. Okay, I marked some information. Okay.
I would think very carefully about density, and maybe you could de-densify the users somehow, or found a flexible model of density. So something that can work for today, but also 4 years from now when we go back to density, something like that.
I guess, good morning, Ms. Trotter. How are you? Do you have any thoughts on any of this so far? We got 2 more minutes, as they say in the news. Are you muted? I can't hear you. Okay. Helen, as an urban designer, what are could you give any quick advice to how he might be thinking about this in downtown?
Well, yeah, I think the comments so far, I give him a lot to think about already, but certainly questions of urban form and environmental performance could inform the project, like Stephen was saying, even something like wind. You could use a daylighting study, understanding how environmental performance of the building or its relationship to prevailing winds, etc. Could inform the massing. Yeah, same with the questions of circulation and where you're going to place the cores. That could really drive the larger form. Seems like there's been a lot of time spent on the facade, and that may leave some flexibility to continue designing.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael, for welcoming me to the conversation. Sorry, I couldn't talk earlier. My only comment would be that I think it's super interesting what Eric was beginning to talk about. Like maybe this project exists in multiple times at once. So there's the time of the 1930s where you have your original building, which had a particular style of urbanism, particularly in Los Angeles. And then there's the kind of pre-COVID time when we were thinking in terms of, I don't know, pretty cheap developer-driven models of density in the city. Was also recently involved in some, reports of corruption, citywide corruption, and then now, and so now you might even have the opportunity to think about your project as like a retrofit of the present, instead of just having to think of it as a retrofit of the past. But even the present now has to be treated like as a found object, and treated as creative material for a future that we are defining right now in really what's between COVID and social justice, and our kind of great reckoning that's happening in the United States right now, at least. Really, we're in an epic defining historical moment, which is awesome, and gives us the opportunity to treat even the present as something that can be remade. So I think there's a lot, if you could maybe totally blow out what you think the inside of the building could be and completely reconfigure it so that you don't just have the expected floor plates and the expected circulation cores and all of the expected stuff, but you just really think about treating what you've already designed together with the 1930s building as something that now has to be just completely retrofitted for this unexpected turn of history. It could be amazing.
I think that's, one of the, what America's bringing up is the possibility or an approach that your project, which you're working on now, you finish it as quickly as possible, and then you remodel it, and you then change it, and the difficulty in doing that at a place like SCI-Arc is that we always expect there to be a lot of deliverables for thesis, a lot of finished work. I think in this case, you would have you would finish this, and then your remodeling part is going to be in a less complete, presented in a less. It'll be presented in a complete way, but the drawings and the modeling of it is going to be less complete. But what you're doing is you're beginning to address what the world is like now in comparison to what the world was when you started your project. And I think that's a really interesting approach.
Here's what might be useful about that, Mike. In general terms, there's now a clearly established, as I think you said, a clearly established format in which the thesis is presented. Animations, models, physical models, drawings of various sorts. And the emphasis is on the production of those subjects or objects. And if you change the discussion and you said, I don't give so much of a damn about whether the section corresponds to the plan, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on this. In fact, the section won't correspond with the plan. The drawings won't all be finished, neither will the models. And this is a process of thinking and documenting to some extent, a process of thinking that's by its nature incomplete. Nobody will do that, maybe. But if one or two people do it, it might suggest a different way of seeing the meaning of thinking of content in relationship to a production of material that confirms the content allegedly, but may not. It may be time to rethink the way the thesis is presented anyway, so that it doesn't represent a finished exhibition somewhere, but it represents a process of thinking.
Yes.
And if one or two people would do that, so then it's suggestive that the format, and it is now a format. It wasn't always like that, and everybody complies with the format. I mean, in a very strange analogy, when Kaepernick was on his knee and everybody was yelling about it, that's one thing. When you turn on the NBA and everyone is on his knee, that is a different meaning, because guess what? Now it's easy to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe what you're talking about has broader implications for the way people think about what constitutes a finished thesis. And I think it's an interesting suggestion.
Yep. Okay. Good discussion.
I love that. That's great. I think that's really, that would be a really a productive development to go in that direction. That's amazing.
You know, one of the things that comes out of that, which I think is the students would now have to show the courage that it takes to risk being yelled at, or worse, the risk of failing. And I think that's what Eric has never been afraid to be yelled at, you know, and he never, anyways, you want to take the risk, Xing. I think what Eric and Merrick are bringing up are really important. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. William Fraser, or Bill as we know him.
Yeah, just share my screen real quick.
Is that a virtual background or?
No, this is a real background.
You know what I discovered with virtual backgrounds is that one of the guys in my office has semi-long hair, and he has a virtual background. So every time he turns his head, he's got this big, it distorts, and his hair sort of sways back and forth like a horse's mane. I was going, wow, that's pretty amazing. Yeah. I started getting jealous. You know, I want to put a wig on so I could do that. Yeah.
Can you see my slides, or is it just my desktop?
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
We're looking at your model.
You can see your slide on your desktop. Now just the slide.
Okay. All right. So I'll just go ahead. So the absence of site-responsive formal languages in contemporary housing developments has resulted in a stagnation of building forms related to our most—
William.
Yes.
Okay. Why don't you start over? Now, instead of you're reading it like you're reading it.
Yeah.
You want to read it with, you know, intonation and as if you're speaking. All right.
Okay.
So I think it helps if you slow down a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Got it.
Because I know how having a normal conversation with you is great. You know, so you want this to sound like a.
Yeah.
Okay. Go on. You got it.
So by treating all elements of the mixed-use building model as typical and non-hierarchical parts, the resulting experience creates disorienting, unpleasant, and often socially exclusive environments. Buildings take shape as autonomous boxes that maximize built footprint on the site, while dwellings become mere cells attached to the endless monotony of hallways. The experience of the building often ends at the sidewalk. By establishing a hierarchy of design elements and formal qualities appropriated from surrounding contexts, however, the mixed-use development can become an integral neighborhood experience rather than a dreaded addition. Form Cubed attempts to deconstruct this formal issue by designing a mixed-use housing development with place form, experiential form, and aggregate form in mind. The complex becomes aggregated in response to the dynamic flow of pitched roofs and interior pedestrian streets, which converge into a series of central step plazas and more private garden areas. Place form allows for more dynamic and nuanced articulation of the individual units while drawing from contextual formal and material qualities of the surrounding site in Austin, Texas. And the resulting experience is elevated by creating a prolonged episodic promenade, which penetrates deep into the site as users enter from the exterior entrances and into the central gathering spaces. And so here are some renderings of the current project. And then I have a short here's the site plan as well.
Wow, you got a lot of building on there.
Where is it?
It's in Austin, Texas.
They connected to the university?
No, it's on the east side, and I chose that site because the east side is a historically kind of low income neighborhood, and now it's gaining a lot of popularity in terms of development. So a lot of the older buildings that gave a lot of character to the neighborhood are being torn down, and they're being built on top of with just these very cheap, quick apartment developments.
So are the white boxes an example of the buildings that gave the neighborhood character?
The white boxes are kind of the examples of what's replacing it.
So is it your ambition to resurrect what it used to be?
Maybe in a sense, not directly, but at least draw some similarities to.
Would it be worthwhile seeing what similarities you're referring to?
Yeah, I think it would be.
Do you have anything to show us?
I don't have any. I haven't put that in the site plan yet, but essentially it's just, you know, a very residential area.
Do you have any kind of interior plan?
No, not at the moment.
Are you making material references as well to the existing neighborhood?
Yeah, so it's mostly kind of sheet metal gable roofs in the existing neighborhood and brick and wood construction.
So how are you making decisions about the form? Not in terms of its image, but in terms of its size, shape. If you're not thinking plan and section at all, like how wide are these units? Like if you go to your roof plan, which I think is interesting, you show you know, kind of a traditional perimeter block housing project with 2 courtyards. It's kind of interesting. Remind me when you showed it a little bit of Peter and Allison Smithson's kind of ideas of inhabiting the interior spaces between buildings in urban context. So I thought that was valuable. But I can't tell by looking at your plans, and maybe that's sort of the excitement, what are going to be those, what's under the roofs, and how you're making those decisions. Just curious.
Yeah,
I think the
interior development is kind of like the next step of the project.
I think the problem is the project doesn't have an intellectual, conceptual component. It's like what you might do for a rendering class or an image making class. So we got pavers and we got sky loaded with weather. We have all of that, with not any conceptual basis for why it is what it is. I mean, personally, I think, and I say personally, I think the jury is less interested in whether you can represent the sky when it's about to storm or thunder, and what the meaning of the building is. I mean, I see the drawing there. There was just a reference to it. I can't read that drawing. I have no idea what I'm looking at. And I think that makes it, if the issue is from the outside of the site and something is happening outside of it, and something is happening in the middle of it, and the building is a sort of interim or mediation between an external condition, and you haven't told us what that is, to an internal condition, and we don't know what that is either, or why it is what it is. If I flip that plan 180 degrees, do you care? If you don't care, that's one issue. But if you do care and its positioning is related to a strategy, an organizational strategy, then we ought to know what it is. There seemed to be the zone of the building, the zone outside the building, and the zone in the middle, and there may be aspects to all of those. So they're not just three, but those are the three primary ones. What's the relationship? And he said, well, what is there that ought to be convincing about this? Like if the developer says, move it or turn it or remove it, and your answer is, I quit. It has to be like this. Okay, why is it like that? And I don't think the renderings tell us really much about that at all. And it's mostly renderings. What's the content of the project?
Bill, I think what you read was really well written, but it's written to be read as opposed to be listened to. I think somewhere in all of that, there is a conceptual basis for the project. What's being asked for is, and you stated that this is different than what's being built now. Is it an antidote to what's not just being what's built, but an approach to basically building in a city, especially like Austin? In a very practical way, you need a drawing that shows what impact does this have on the neighborhood? How does this influence how people live in and around this, or work in and around this? What influence does it have on future developments? You know, and then what Stephen was initially asking, what's the basis of the decisions that you're making? You're very intuitive, and I think I've worked with you before, and I think you have a lot of talent. How do you not just define it, but how do you describe it so that other people can understand what the basis of your choices are? Like when you look at the elevation, I can see a continuous line moving all the way around, for instance. I don't know, just your formal, I think you do have a formal strategy, but you may not be as aware of it as you might need to be in order for others to be let into your world. I mean, this view is really I don't know, I find this whole elevation really quite wonderful. It's many things and one thing at the same time. So I think that's where your intuition is really operating at a higher level. But you have to have a way to describe this thing. What's the conceptual basis, as Eric is bringing up? How does this thing impact the neighborhood? And then how does it begin to influence future developments is really what perhaps an aspiration is.
If I could. I appreciated the straightforward clarity of the presentation. I think that there's a design ambition there that is one of the fundamental problems of housing, particularly dense housing today. This idea of trying to insert some kind of difference into all of these elements while still maintaining some degree of coherence is a very difficult problem. To me, the fundamental flaw in the design problem right now is that it doesn't aspire to the same kind of density that the surrounding buildings do. There's a reason why they're that dense. It's because it makes sense economically. And if you could somehow deal in that problem while still maintaining the kind of design ambitions that you have here, I think you've got a very real problem on your hands that a lot of people grapple with. Some with developers that have the stomach to do it, and some that don't. But let's assume you have one. At the very least, he's going to say to you, "I want the same density. I'll go down that road with you in terms of design, but give me the same density." Then you can at least argue that all of this differentiation is providing for individuality, amounts of light and air that are moving deep into the project, a kind of formal architectural interest. So I'm totally on board with the architectural and aesthetic ambitions. I just think you've got to deal in the problem that sets this up. Otherwise, it's you're playing really more than you are dealing with what the issues are on a site like this.
If you're willing to say, I don't know how you know that this is dense or not. We haven't seen a plan. And I think the discussion is confusing an external image as if an image which is useful to some members of the jury is a confirmation of content. And if the renderings don't, the organization of the project on the site is potentially the key issue. What's the outside? What's in between? What's in the middle? We don't know. There aren't any drawings that tell you what it's like in the units or in the courtyard. This is Austin. It's not Dallas, Fort Worth. It's not Houston. It has a reputation, whether deserve it or not. It's a more liberal, it's a more progressive, it's more academically oriented. In what sense is this building a kind of conceptual precedent setter? And I think if we want to give credibility to this as a function of renderings, again, colors, skies, all of that kind of content, then it's a drawing class. And then the subject matter is different. And I think the demands that architecture, particularly now, makes in terms of content need to be acknowledged. So that, as I say, there was no answer to the question. If we took the project and rotated it 179 degrees, does it matter? Does it? Why does it? If William. It doesn't, I'm not saying there is no content in that discussion, but what is it? Where is it? What's the argument? So there needs to be some of that to substantiate the project.
William, you have any thoughts on any? Oh, wait, somebody else was going to speak. Sorry.
You can call on me after, William.
Oh, you can speak, Helen. I'm going to give William a moment to think. William, you're going next. You're going next, William.
So there's a couple of different ways to approach the thesis, right? And begin to answer that question of what is the purpose of the project. One is establishing a broader research question or something, some question that will help define design decisions, since of course you're not going to be able to resolve everything in the time of the thesis. The other is, in absence of a brief that you might have for another sort of studio, to define some of the more architectural parameters of what would be a brief if this was a project, that will then give you something to push back on in terms of resolving the design. So that could be, for instance, programmatically, if you begin to imagine a bit more what the actual programmatic requirements of this building are, it will give you something to help then resolve formally. For example, how many people do you want to be able to gather in the courtyard? How much square footage does this building really need? What is the programmatic breakdown of rooms? One way to start giving yourself that kind of information is to look to the neighborhood, a little bit kind of broader analysis in terms of understanding whether it's FAR, occupancy, what's the kind of target you're setting, whether it's related to the existing buildings that you talked about or the new buildings that are coming in. That will kind of give you a target that you could use to adjust your form. Same in terms of circulation or just understanding how people move through this district slightly more broadly, whether there might be walking as well as driving. It might give you a way to answer the question of what side of this super block your main entrance is and whether it, whether it could be flipped. So if you keep the basic idea of this perimeter block building, large courtyard, then just giving yourself some programmatic, maybe it is just like some metrics to help you resolve the interior and also the size of the exterior spaces, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wanted to add, I think my assumptions about the density that you have are based on these surrounding buildings that you have here. That might not be the case. I might be incorrect. You could be packing the same amount of density into here. For example, this might be micro housing and the units are much smaller. There was a really interesting story about micro housing in San Francisco, where over the last year, they found that the average price of a micro house is per month is greater than the average price of a one bedroom. There are a lot of complicated financial issues related to that, but it does say that there's incredible value in micro housing. And I think Austin would be certainly the only place in Texas where you might be able to get away with that kind of thing. That would be an argument for the financial way of dealing with this while still being able to allow for the same kind of, at least number of units that you get within the surrounding neighborhood.
You could do something similar with the argument for a large open space, either within this building or adjacent to it.
William, you're not going to solve the problem of a developer, but I think many of the questions that are being raised would point to this is an opportunity for you to at least know what are the parameters that a developer sets in order to do a project at this time in an urban place. You should understand what is the basis of a financial model, and that's not hard to find any of that. You're not going to check any boxes, but you're going to at least know how that conversation progresses. I think it's important. And what Dwayne is bringing up, the micro housing. It's interesting that you can put a term like micro housing on what is essentially a really tiny apartment, and then they're charging, as they do in Los Angeles, anywhere from $4 to $6 a square foot, which is in San Francisco, it's much higher.
You could also make the argument micro housing and COVID-19 don't really have a good relationship. Well, William, I think you have the potentially strong project. It's drawn it only in one manner. And so you've delimited the way in which you can communicate what you're trying to do.
Right.
And so I think your site plan actually is pretty good. And I think the minute Eric makes a comment like, why site it this way, that way, or this way, you've made a decision to push it off the street on one side. You have different kind of little pocket park type things on other sides. You just haven't drawn enough of a site map to explain why you've made choices. You also haven't given us enough of a vernacular localized environment to see how you're playing with that local environment to create your architecture. So you do have these vernacular type of roofs that probably have gained views from the local conditions, but you haven't given us or provided that imagery. So people, and then of course, as everyone said, without a plan, and I would argue a section, you can't sell the storyline. And it also makes us wonder, how are you designing in Rhino this object without a sense of how wide it needs to be, or how, housing is actually quite difficult and requires some level of expertise that you need to kind of master. So those are things. And then ultimately my last comment is about a politic. What type of housing you put in there makes a statement. How you open it up to local communities. You made a really interesting comment that the building doesn't end at the sidewalk, but your building ends at the sidewalk. And so I'm like, well, why hasn't he extended beyond in this kind of post-COVID reality? Can't you extend into the sidewalk? You haven't pushed on that level, but you said the right things. So I like your project. I think you have great potential. It's just not drawn enough to be convincing. And then you leave yourself open to these kind of critiques where people find it not there, even though it's there. So I hope that you just dive in.
So I want to make I want to make a different kind of comment just in case it's helpful. But before I make that comment, just in passing, I would say, William, as the history theory czar at SCI-Arc right now, I encourage you not to read your statement and not to write it so beautifully, actually. I would far prefer that you simply describe your project in simple terms without jargon. And that you stop thinking of it as a little essay and just start thinking about it as a way to let other people into your design headspace. So that would mean actually less beautiful writing, strangely. Although what you've written right now might come in handy later, it's actually not useful as a way to let us into the project. So just the next time that you present your project to jurors or outside people that are not so closely connected to what you're doing and why you're doing it, please don't read a script. It would just be more helpful. But my formal comment, by the way, just let you guys know, I've been trying to get rid of the thesis statement altogether, but I have not yet succeeded in that.
It's kind of ironic because what I've noticed, like in the last the miniatures, the stuff is well written and thought through. And I attribute that to you. So that's the irony of it.
The other way to do this, if everyone has a well-written statement, just extract the bullet points. You can submit your statement to go on the wall, but then when you present it, you just have bullet points. So you're forced to state in your own words in a way you're comfortable with and that people can relate to more easily when you present to your jury.
Okay, Merrick, I'm sorry I cut you off.
No, it's okay.
No, finish. What
I was going to say, I just want, because I agree with the comments that you've been given. I think you really have received an excellent critique of your project. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about the formal move that it seems like you're beginning to develop, which is interesting to me because I haven't seen a lot of it in recent times, which is much more planar. I almost feel like in a couple of views, like the one I'm looking at here, it's almost like a bunch of folded paper airplanes landed on this site and began to have a little community with each other. And recently we've been much more over on the side of chunks and masses. And much less invested in planes. And I happen to know, just because I used to live and practice architecture in Texas, that there is actually a quite strong vernacular tradition that's based on planar elements. And you began to describe that a little bit in your reference to things like corrugated metal and other elements like that. Lake Flato is pretty well known for having capitalized on that kind of aesthetic. And actually that might be a way for you to kind of push an aesthetic agenda that speaks to like an individual approach and looks very different from what we're commonly seeing in your classmates' work today. So maybe you should, there are parts of this project that are still very massy that have to do with big chunks that are placed on the site, and parts of, there are shapes and volumes that are bullioned out of those masses. Maybe you should find a way to make the whole project planar, actually, and really just dig into that and say, this is my direction, this is architecture for Austin, this relates to a particular set of materials and a particular set of traditions. It also has some, I think, potentials for how you might spread your project out away from the building envelope onto the sidewalk and beyond, et cetera, et cetera. Could be kind of cool, could be very different.
Who's that? Who's speaking?
I don't know.
Okay. William, last word?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate all the comments. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in developing this, and kind of pursuing the conceptual idea of approaching density with design through drawing is like where I really need to push the project. Yeah, I appreciate all the comments.
I would disagree with what you just said, William. That's not what you need to do on the project, because you can't really do that in the next 4 weeks on the project. That's not possible. What is possible is for you to take the criticisms, which basically you and I have discussed almost every one of those issues previously. And the failure primarily in terms of today is the fact that you didn't really provide all the sort of contextualizing information that basically allowed people to really understand the framework for a lot of the decisions that you made. So basically what you need to do is you need to clarify how to present your problem, what the storyline of your project is, and show how that there's a logic, if not a conceptual theoretical framework that allowed you to produce a project as it is today. That's primarily could be done very simply with a set of diagrams and a set of plans that begins to articulate all basically your strategy for dealing with the issues which have been presented. It's not an issue of density. You're not going to solve that.
I think the only thing I would say to that, Coy, is the juxtaposition between the explanation of the content and the meaning of the project, outside, inside, old history of Austin, new work in Austin, and the imaging of the project is where the problem is. That's where the disjunction is. If he wants to make this a drawing exercise or an imaging exercise or a kind of fantasy representation exercise, that's within the realm of possibility, but then the explanation has to be different. So the problem is the discrepancy between what's drawn, what's up on the screen, and what's explained.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. But I'm just saying that there are a lot of issues which were, not all of them, but a lot of the issues which were brought up, he and I certainly touched on. And there's some that didn't get brought up that we've touched on, which basically is going to make the project a stronger project in terms of being able to understand his intent and what he's accomplished. So no disagreement, really.
No, I think, William, the phrase that Coy used, which I think is important for all the students, because this is the basis for all the questions that we have about projects, is when we say basis of choice, it's really what's the contextualizing information that's needed to understand the project. Right. And I think that's key, right? And I know you work hard and fast, and that's what you really want to concentrate on. So it's all right. All right, thank you so much. All right, next student, Wangzhuo. Are you with us?
Hi, I'm Wangzhuo. I'm gonna share my so hi, I'm Wangzhuo. My project is a story about eternal return, which is inspired by manga Firebird, written by Tezuka Osuma. My concept is that during the Earth's history, what does the architecture stay the same? And with the time passing by, architecture is in revolution. And at the end of the history, it will bring you back to the beginning, but it's not the same because it brings you to a higher level. I picked like 5 certain important architecture points in one of the view of the life. First one is the story about Teotihuacan. Story 2 is about St. Peter's Cathedral. Story 3 is about like Sagrada Familia. Story 4 is about like a future space station, which is in the future. And the story 5, which is also Teotihuacan, but is at the end of the wheel, is really, really future. This is a story about the Teotihuacan, and I was trying to make like non-stop animation. So I have the script of that. I worked with my friend who is a director, And these are like a script for the story 1. And also in the presentation, the first story about Teotihuacan is about like the main character wants to sacrifice himself to end the war, and also he wants to cure his wife because of the disease. And at a certain time, Firebird goes out and he end the war and also cure his wife. And the main character become the leader of the tribes, and then they become a new one tribe, and then they become a really bright future. The story 2 is about like St. Peter's Cathedral, when Michelangelo was working on St. Peter's Cathedral, and he dreamed of like Firebirds who gave him a hint about like a story about like Teotihuacan, and he inspired by that, and he designed the St. Peter's Cathedral based on his dream. The third one is Sagrada Familia. After the Columbus find the new continent, people finally find Teotihuacan, and Gaudi he finally gets a stone named Comet Diamond, and this diamond has a really interesting, mysterious secret. Gaudi finally understands what's the secret in that, and then he built up Sagrada Familia, and he sealed the secret and also the Comet Diamond into that building. Story 4 is the future station, which means that future people understand what's the Comet Diamond's secret, which is a neutron detector, which can emit and absorb waves. It's also information from the outer space, and people at that time, they want to build up like a future station to send people to the outer space. The story 5 is also Teotihuacan, which several astronauts go to the outer space, and only one people survive into an unknown planet, and he lived there for a long time until he cannot die. He becomes the god of that planet. Only one people survive on that planet, and then he becomes the god. His eye becomes the sun. His other eye becomes the moon, and his hair becomes the forest. His blood becomes the river, and his bodies becomes the mountains and also landscapes. And now a new story begins, like the life of the wheel. And based on this wheel of the life, I name it as spiritual logical, which means the beginning repeats at the end, based on the teleology, which is the study of the end. In the story, at the start and the end never they maybe become same, but it's at the end of the story, it's going to a higher level, which every wheel of life will looks like the same, but it looks different. For project, I was going to use 4 different strategy. The first project is using religion as the science and mimic as the technology. For St. Peter's, I was going to use mathematics, especially Euclid planar geometry as the science, and the topology as the technology. In Sagrada Familia, I was trying to use astrophysics as a science, and also linear surface from nature as the technology. For the fourth building, Field Traveler Station, I'm going to using the biochemistry as the science, and also molecular structure with function as the technology. This is a side diagram of the Teotihuacan. The shape under beyond that is called Metatron cubes, which is a symbol that means to represent the journey of energy throughout the universe and balance within the universe. It made of the planic solids, but it also the certain circles to represent the certain archaeologies. The shape of these the location of these buildings are different because it's reviews like zodiac in the future in the future stories. And then there's a section of the Teotihuacan. I was trying to use like simple geometries to represent like a fusionism, and also the worship in Asian culture people. They believe in a huge and a large stuff to represent their worship. You can see there's like stairs didn't cut through. It's a stairs which is, I called it as like Mobius stairs. It has the small spiral stairs and a large spiral stairs outside, and it has like same end and the same it has the same from the entrance, and at the thinness of the stairs there's like no end, so it's totally like Mobius from the top to the end. The use of the Teotihuacan in this building, they have 6 layers. The first 2 layers is for the general people. The second 2 layers is for the royalty people, or also the priest. And this, the top of 2 of layers is used for the king and also the great priest. And also this is the interior of Teotihuacan of the design. The second one is called St. Peter's, which is built by Michelangelo, and this is the side drawings on the real site. The diagram of St. Peter's is based on like this. The Michelangelo dreamed of the Firebird, and he gave him a new land which is never discovered, and he also find like the Metatron cubes. So he first of all he used the methods to line up all like the circle, all of the center, as well as the lines between each other, and then he simplified some of the line, and then he find like different kind of geometries which are all polyhedron. There's totally 4 polyhedrons found in that shape, and then I'm doing like combine each other, and then using some of the lines to trim, and then fold up like some of the edges to build up like a shape, the mass. And for the center, I was using like butterfly series, which is really famous in Euclid planar geometry field. I use that shape and project on a ball, and then generate like shape into like as the nave. And also I use the typology, which I picked several components in from the Renaissance church. First off, it's batteries, vault, columns, and windows, doors, and walls. And then these are like the original use of the cathedral. And then I tear it apart, and I was trying to resemble that into a new meaning. These are interior of the St. Peter's. It has different layers, and also all the like the shape is based on the line from the from here. This is a section of the St. Peter's, and this is like the exterior of the St. Peter's. Remains some of the elements from like the Renaissance, but we build them into several different materials, such as like the wall is like inserted into like the mosque glass as the facade. This is the concept of Sagrada Familia. I haven't finished that yet, and I was trying to use like astrophysics as the point to use gravity into the space, and also because the nature science of nature science was plenty used from by Gaudi. So I was trying to, and also the hyperbolic. So I was trying to use the L system, which is like the tree trunks, And the middle is I was trying to use the mineral surface, which is the advanced use of the hyperbolic, and also the shape I was trying to use as like leaves, and also like a trees to support like leaves. Oh, sorry, the name is wrong. So this is like the concept of the future station, which is this is not this is sent by my friend who works in the hospital, and I was trying to use the biochemistry as the science, and I was trying to use the neutron system, neuron system actually, to build like the station, which can have like transportation and also circulation, and also the structure of the inside. Yeah, that's it. So because the story, the brief story is here. Maybe you might, my English sucks. So if you want to understand what's the
I think you said quite a bit, which is good. Why don't we open it up for discussion now, Wangzhuo?
Okay, sure.
I'm not sure what the thesis is. It seems like, in some sense, you're sort of developing, a notion of history and some mythological parallels, perhaps, and then you're proposing some new form of juxtaposing form relationships. So I'm not really sure where the thesis is, whether it's in the philosophizing and the story and maybe a film, or whether it's in the projects and trying to demonstrate how this strategy and this understanding basically gives you some fresh architectural qualities, experiences. It's very, I'm very mystified.
I think, Koi, what fascinates me about this project is that first there's the great stories by Tezuka, which is the Phoenix. He died before he finished them all, but it's a great, there's 10 volumes. And he's the godfather, the father of manga. But anyways, the possibility of being inspired by he being inspired by a great work of fiction, and then figuring out how does storytelling motivate the architecture, I think is quite unique. And it's not in the realm of how we would normally approach this. And then how do you weave together, how do you write one story that's broken up into 5 stories that are all woven together, and then figure out how to, and then depict the architectures of these periods and then reinterpret them in a way that's more of a kind of illustration of the story, but then trying to find a rigor. That's my understanding of what he's doing.
Yeah, Michael, I'm very liberal. You can take anything and try to make an architecture out of it, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm all on board with the intent, but I think the format of presentation is wrong for that intent. I don't think that it's communicating perhaps the depth of the basis of his research. And I don't think that the mode of presentation allows us to feel a sense of intensification and intimacy that storytelling often can do. So it seems to me that basically it's just a matter of the presentation. He presented it rather didactically, but it's essentially an emotional understanding of the evolution of life. But I'm not feeling that from the presentation. So not disagreeing with it, I just really wish the presentation served the intent and the content more appropriately.
I agree with it, but I also just want to really quickly say, Wang, like, I don't know if you've played Civilization, the game. If I was you and I had to present a thesis in a few weeks, I would say I was hired basically to do gaming media entertainment environments for a new gaming movie like Civilization. And I've used these methods and techniques in order to develop this new story and kind of develop it that way. I mean, I teach at Art Center, media, gaming, entertainment stuff, and this is exactly what they do. So I think it's really interesting. I think it's very provocational. I agree with Koi that your story is just not going to come across in the time that you have. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Popol Vuh. Have you ever heard of it? It's a Mayan story. And you can go online and you can see the cartoon that they created by all the ceramics. It's really interesting. And it tells the story of the Mayan history in this really fun, beautiful way. And it's only like a minute or two. So if there was an animation of like your story for a little bit that gave us an idea of one of these little storylines, it might be more fun and interesting to kind of jump into. But otherwise, I just think you need a quick strategy to explain why the heck you're doing this. And because this is done all the time in gaming and media entertainment environments, why not? That's just all I'm gonna say. I think
Mike, I wanted to ask the architect whether the architect thinks that Teotihuacan is presently constituted, or St. Peter's is presently constituted, or Sagrada Familia is presently constituted, is inadequate as it is at the moment. And therefore, in order to be operationally intelligible in a contemporary sense, we need to do this, to update it. We need to do that? Is this mandatory?
I was not trying to update it that, because I was trying to do, this is like a science fiction, and then I was trying to do is like a, you know, a parallel universe, what we're going to revolution from the start to the end.
So I guess I'm looking at it in terms of a level of seriousness, that if Teotihuacan had a meaning historically, and that meaning is gone or lost or can't be retrieved or shouldn't be retrieved, and to contemporize the building, what you need to do is introduce something into its meaning so that its meaning continues in the future. I don't know what would be a good example if you said the Louvre was a house and now it became a museum, and the convertibility of the project and the space and the content made it operationally intelligible again to another generation in a different way. So the question really has to do with whether this is a relationship between old and new that could be any number of options. In other words, what you use to remake Teotihuacan could be flipped and reused to remake, let's say, the Sagrada Familia. And it doesn't matter which is which. What I'm interested in is why you did those things in each case and whether they matter. So if it's understood as gaming, and we all do this, and today it'll be the Sagrada Familia and astrophysics, and tomorrow it'll be Teotihuacan and astrophysics, and it doesn't matter because it's a game. But when you look at the longevity of these buildings, the durability of the buildings, at least physiologically, and the meanings that they carry over long periods of time, they're religious buildings, except for the new one, which seems to be a non sequitur in a completely different way. So the religious meanings of the original buildings don't seem to follow in the contemporary building. This is another question, but whether you should have used Teotihuacan as the introductory piece to the contemporary building, so that again you took something new and something old, except the chronology was different. I think that the question is a question of purpose. I think the areas of interest and a lot of the information that you're pulling up, it's not entirely coherent, and I think this is understandable. You're taking a huge piece of human history, but again, I'm trying to understand the meaning of the adjustments you're making in the building. I mean, 10 minutes ago, we were talking to a guy who came downtown LA, took an old building, stuck some new buildings that didn't look particularly new on top of them. And we were trying to understand, why would he do that? Why would he make that insertion of new and old, or more of the same and more of the same, whatever it was? I think the same question applies here in a slightly more profound way. And if it's a game and it doesn't matter, I mean, there's an interesting example that came up.
It still matters, Eric. You're right. It needs to have a cohesive storyline that makes sense. Why he's adjusting what he's adjusting.
If it's a game, when the game's over, the game's over. But Teotihuacan has been around for 1,000 years.
But he's not touching that building. In reality, there's no way he's building this gigantic spherical object in a false rendition of Teotihuacan. He's not doing that.
First of all, I don't know that the construction viability of the scheme is really the issue.
He's drawn it incorrectly. It's a corbel. There's no physical way he could do what he's doing.
I think that's less the point. If you want me to figure out how to introduce one of those things into the other, I think we can do that if we wanted to. But this is not a construction documents class or even a design. What it is a content concept. And you can see it now with Hagia Sophia in the contemporary world in terms of something which had a history that belongs to Christianity and the Romans, and then 1453 or whatever it was, it belongs to the Muslims, and the convertibility in a different way, but the convertibility of a religious building with one series of meanings to another series of meanings, and then potentially back to the original meaning. Oh, it's a museum. Oh, no, it isn't. So this is a serious subject. And I would submit that if you turn it into gaming, it's a serious subject in terms of making it. It's not a serious subject in terms of a cultural question. Architecture deals with cultural questions over long, long periods of time.
And the gaming industry takes on those issues. They're not devoid of thinking of cultural politics when someone invents a game. I mean, I don't know.
They're very trendy. They're very trendy, which is why one goes away and 20 minutes later, another one comes back. The time.
I don't know, Eric. I don't think that's true. I think we're talking about new forms of cultural expression that actually have longevity and that build on one another over time in a way that's quite analogous, actually, to, let's say, things like paper architecture that end up having lives well beyond a particular moment in history, even though they may not be built. So I think when Stephen is talking about gaming, he's not talking about a quick experience that then goes away. He's talking about a substantial contribution to culture.
Well, but wait a minute. You'd have to come back, I mean, to make that statement, you'd have to come back in 2,000 years and say that's so. Gaming is relatively contemporary. It deals with contemporary questions, and there's no question that those questions have to do with a cultural context. They aren't necessarily in that form durable. If you build it out of stone and it lasts 2,000 years, and
arguably the game is more
durable. It's a different context.
The gaming may be more durable. It's in a digital format. It's in the world. People play it. It's the biggest industry in the world. I mean,
today.
Yeah.
How long has that been the case?
Probably almost a decade plus.
Okay, and how long has Hagia Sophia been around?
I don't know. Now it's in the game. Now in Civilization, you can go see it in the game. I don't know. We may never be allowed inside it again. It's no longer a museum. That's an interesting cultural question you're asking.
Well, never is a long time. I mean, there have been periods in the history of that building, including the last, I don't know, since Ataturk, where they turned it into a museum. So I don't know. I
don't know either. I'm just saying gaming's not invaluable.
But you're defending something that's not being attacked. The discussion is the meaning over time in a context where there is no time history associated with gaming, and there is a huge time component in the project that's being presented. So the correlation between the two is what I'm questioning.
Let me clarify. His intention is not to make a game. He's not going to be dealing with game structure, mechanics, any of that. That's not what this is. Although it might be parallel to what's being done in gaming, that's not his interest or intent. And I mean,
but I think the gaming comment is fascinating, actually.
It is,
because it what I was asking was, how significant are the decisions to correlate something old with something new?
Yeah.
An old building with a new way of remaking the building. Not so much can Steve Matt go over there and build it, but what's the association between a new idea and an old idea, like the original, like the first project that was presented? And if that correlation between whatever the hell it was, astrophysics and Teotihuacan, has an intrinsic meaning to the architect, to the person who conceived this, that's different than if that meaning ends when the game ends, and then you go off and do Madden. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's supposed to be a durable content connection over eons, that's different than if it ends in 20 minutes. They have different meanings.
I think we're also dealing with the fictional qualities of writing and books and image making. This is a fictional tale he's written. It's a fictional story he's made up. I mean, I think we're all struggling to find, as you said, meaning in it. And it's because I don't think, as quite pointed out, it's an easy format for him to tell this massive storyline that he's come up with that may guide the reasonings behind why. I mean, I'm only looking at the Gothic church with a glass ceiling. I don't really know what the value added of that is or what the storyline is, if it has anything to do with Notre Dame. It's St. Peter's, so it's either a different one. I mean, I don't know what he's trying to do. And I don't know if I'm ever going to get it in the 5 minutes he's going to get to present. So how is he?
Well, I felt like what was missing was the majority of the time, and a significant amount of time, was spent discussing the specifics of the interventions, which you're not willing to invest your time in understanding what those are unless he first explains why he would want to do this, why there is still relevance and sort of cultural resonance in the creation of narratives and the modification of buildings. If he can convince us of that, then I'd be willing to go into this parallel world where we see how they specifically resonate. It's not that I'm saying I don't want to see the specifics, but I have to believe that there's a reason to try to pay attention to them. And I just thought that argument for why the narrative was essential or contributed something to architecture today was missing from the argument.
But
yeah, I agree with that, Dwayne. I thought the same thing, and I was also wondering too, just Wangzhuo, the amount of time that it took you to get through this at the midterm, to me was, to just kind of explain the thing, I thought was indicative of the fact that you've spent a lot of time building the thing, and maybe not quite enough time thinking of why you're building it or how you would represent its value in a quick way to others. So that's where I would maybe focus. It doesn't have to be a long period of time, maybe just like an hour or two, working with your advisor to try to really set up the value and the contribution that this represents in a way that is accessible to others.
Well, one way to address that, I mean, we're always coming back to a standard format and a standard presentation of a thesis, which is why the discussion of presenting the thesis, and I think Michael suggested this originally, that the presentation of a thesis has become a format, and the students recognize it and they deliver in that format. So the hypothesis that it might be presented in a more fragmented or exploratory way, I think I said the plan wouldn't have to correlate with the section, may also have to do with the way this thing is presented. It may be, and it seemed to me, that it might be a better project if you took one of the subjects, although I understand multiple has a different suggestive meaning, but if you took one of the projects and interrogated that juxtaposition of an old vantage point and a newer one, you might be able to substantiate it and dig into it a hell of a lot easier than to try to do 4 when you wind up comparing the 4 and seeing what works in 1 doesn't work in 3, and so on and so on. In terms of a motivation, it wouldn't be hard. I mean, Erdogan is making this argument. I don't find it very convincing. But if you said these are religious buildings, and if you said that over long periods of time, the symbolism of religion, the content of religion, the practice of religion moves. It's understood differently. It changes, its practices change, and therefore you have this giant structure somewhere. So this is outside the historical society's context. And you say, okay, it has a religious history, just as Teotihuacan and a lot of those buildings, I think this is true in Chichen Itza, are in fact buildings built over buildings. So it was this, and then 50 years later, it was that, and they're stacked one on top of each other. So the fact that something else is introduced is, in a rough sense, part of the pedigree and the history of those kinds of buildings. So if he simply wanted to say, this updates, if you look at that hunk of stuff that he wrapped around Bernini and Michelangelo in Rome, and he looked at that, to me, that's a challenging subject. That doesn't mean that's an answer to something, but it raises some questions. Some guy sticks a pyramid in the plaza at the Louvre. So we could talk about that. I think it gets more difficult because there are so many projects and they're all relatively incomplete. And again, the motive, if the motive is to contemporize an antiquated religious practice, I could understand that. Alto did that in Vuxeniska, not by making a new building, but by making a church building, which is like a YMCA building in some ways, that it has different meanings and different purposes. You can do that with a new building that remakes an existing type, or you can he can do this. I think there's a case to be made for it. It's certainly an intellectual and a cultural case. He just has to make it. I think in the end, there are too many projects. And I agree. I think that may be the key problem.
You know, there was something that I read a while ago about how a lot of sacred sites that were built in what was considered by the great religions as being pagan, and they were outlawed. People were still going to them, and they still wanted to practice and ritualize those sites. They couldn't stop people from going to them, and the way they handled it, whoever the governance structure was by turning them into tourist attractions, and which basically eliminates all the meaning out of them. I think all of these buildings are basically tourist attractions. I don't think which is one of the sad things about it. I think for a student to take on a subject like this is a dissertation that takes 4 years, 5 years to write. So I would agree with all of you that are saying that this needs to be focused and reduced down to one particular building that would then be drawn and clarified in a way that would then suggest how the other ones would be dealt with. But I think the ambition of not just this student, but many of the students is pretty extraordinary right now, especially when in this case he's taking on a subject which I think is both in the back and the front of our minds, which is this the end of not the end of the planet? Is this the end of our species? And it's very likely that this might be the beginning of the end. You know, global warming has been updated to 20 years. The pandemic, who knows how many millions more people are going to be affected by this. And just the habits and routines of the way we live, the algorithm is basically taking us to the end line right now. And unless, so how do you find a story that starts with darkness, which is the Phoenix started with darkness. This is a man that was born into the end of the World War II, and saw the massive destruction of Japan. But then he turned it into a story that has darkness in it, but then it comes back into the light, which is, I think, an extraordinary tale. And I think that's really the struggle that this particular student is having. So in any case, that's enough for me, enough of me talking. Thank you, Wangzhuo. We'll speak again. And let's move on to the next team, which is Binji and Yunfei.
Hi. 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 I'm Ping. I'm Fei. So we are gonna start to share our screen.
I thought you were gonna start dancing. That's I'm Ping. I'm Wei. Which might be a good way to start a thesis presentation, singing and dancing.
Our thesis project is about feasibility. When architecture faces varying conditions and different eras, unpredictability and uncertainty are the main features we are focused on. For instance, we are facing COVID-19, and many aspects of daily life have changed during this time. However, Los Angeles will operate the Summer Olympic Games in 2028. Can the architecture adapt to this extreme situation? One is keeping distance, and the other is people gather to celebrate. When architecture becomes entirely predictable, it loses the potential to develop further when it achieves stability and the norm. Our site is located in the middle of multiple highways with existing buildings. The isolation of the site let us have the chance to rebuild ground circulation and connect to the surrounding contact. However, it could keep the isolation by controlling the circulation for further need. First, we transform the existing building structure to the steel frame in different orientation. By doing this, we rebuild our site as smaller blocks with different features. The white line has a bigger opening facing to the local road. The narrow line's main entrance is in the north and downtown LA, which need to travel above the highway. The intersection is located beside the biggest open space. The frame has the capacity to attach or remove the capsule, which have the changeability of number and location. In certain places, we bend some frame to apply public space on the frame. The order of elements develop our project. The mountain-shaped massing and cave-like freeform interior create a sense of uncertainty when we demolish the traditional definition of architecture element. This chunk model illustrates the assets, including gray site and existing structure, pink steel frame, circulation to surrounding area, rooftop louver, and cave-like interior. The concept is how these elements make unpredictable and uncertain spaces when merged together. The loss of orientation is one of the features. The program in our project is an office campus, including multiple kinds of offices with retail and residential area that could support daily life under different times. The units hanging on the frame would be customized private space, lighthouse, and small office. Comparing with public space in big massing, this free-form capsule would be community center spaces, provide conference room, classroom, rest area, and lounge for people who use the hanging units. In the massing, other spaces serve people in the city scale. There would be company headquarters, retail area, food court, exhibition hall, and auditorium. At the same time, we need local circulation from existing infrastructure as response to the environment. This diagram is about on-site public circulation, including roads and rail. The diversity of circulation and the blocks make our project has more possibility. In the red diagram, different ways for cars to get in and exit site, including local roads and highway. In the green diagram, showing how pedestrians get in and exit the site from different areas. The yellow diagram is talking about the rail on site and where are the stops. By detaching architecture from being defined through its interaction with humans, we consider ways in which architecture also interacts recursively with itself, including the elements we mentioned. In the session, we want to show how we arrange variant spaces. Here, we want to talk more about the frame part. The diagram shows varying relationship between the frames and highways. First is the underground frame as a pedestrian entrance into the site. Second is a frame in the sky across the highway. Third is a cantilever frame on the highway. Fourth, the parallel frame sits beside the highway. We use ramps, slabs, stairs, and elevators to link the ground and the frames. Also, applying different landscape design in varying ground situations is one of our ideas. There are two types of vertical circulation on site. Dark blue is the public stairs and elevators. The light blue provide the private circulation, including vertical and horizontal elevators, which lead to specific space without meeting other people. Left side is the charm of regular frame. Right side is the charm of curved frame. This joint detail helps us develop our frame system by rotation. These following few images are the curved frame spaces assembly diagram. The main structure is the cantilever being attached to curved frame. And then the secondary structure follows the shape of the space. The smaller beam will support the interior elements. And then the interior wall, interior stairs and floor. And last, the facade mullion and curtain wall. The following few images are the regular frame spaces assembly diagram. We try to use limited elements to create the possibility of varying spaces, including horizontal and vertical frame pieces and joints. The connection frame link different lines of frame and its support of the elevators. And then it's the vertical and horizontal elevator. By adding the modular capsule support, including column, beam, and fixed joint, the slab could stick on the frame. This is the top layer of the fixed slab. And then the fixed column, fixed beam, and this is a unit circulation. Modulate floor plan for customizing by putting the column and wall in different places for different operations. The customized beam and slab location provide the chance to build second floor. And this is the optional second floor and the optional third floor. The second and third floor could be customized to varying shape as well. And this is just one option in unlimited possibilities. And this is a private unit assembly sequence. Our project is a container of era. As time passes, it can continuously update and revise and respond to the changes. Here are more possibilities. The trunk model illustrates how the different orientation frames intersect with each other and how they merge with solid massing with free-form shape interior. Here is showing the private horizontal and vertical elevator in the session. Comparing with private linear circulation, the public escalator are the dots in the huge massing that let people move like radiation without a specific direction. This one is the perspective view from for Helen units. And this one is the perspective view from the on-site rail. Here, we want to talk more about the meshing part. This is the meshing warm eye interior render. And the warm eye public circulation diagram. This one is from the bird view. And the perspective view on meshing rooftop. And there are some interior render. Our project has a tension between each architectural element from the unique sensibility, qualities, and identity. It leaves the viewer a feeling that there is more than one way to read and use this project. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, excellent.
Could you guys see the video we are sharing?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because the computer is kind of lagging.
Yeah, really wonderful work. Yeah, really nice work. I think there's so many arguments being made for buildings that try to deal directly with this COVID issue, and I think unless things get dramatically worse in unexpected ways, the reality is we're going to return to some kind of new normal where people more than ever want to congregate and do all the things we used to do. But maybe now with the knowledge that we ought to be prepared for this kind of thing to happen again. And I think this idea of adaptability is a really wonderful way to think about how architecture might do that. We've seen these kind of ideas about adaptability a lot for a long time, but often without a specificity to help drive the kind of adaptability that might actually make sense. I really like the idea that you've got this kind of large adaptable thing, and you study it in such extreme detail. It's beautiful. What the recommendation I'd have is I think it would be helpful to, before you move into that small scale stuff, to help us to build a bit of a bridge there, not literally, that helps us understand how it organizationally deals with those the two different types of things that you're arguing the adaptability should be able to do. So what you seem to have done very well is argued for relatively small spaces that can begin to infill and stack and aggregate within your system. What you didn't say much about is the ability of the in-between spaces, meaning probably in between the armatures, to allow for outdoor activities, large gatherings, all the things that we could do in both cases, COVID, not COVID, but probably in different forms, some inside, some outside. There are varying scales, but you didn't talk a lot about larger spaces and congregation. And I think that this scheme has the ability to do that in a really beautiful way.
Thank you.
Have you both thought about that?
Uh,
We understand what the parts are that you're inhabiting, but then there's also the space in between those parts that Dwayne is mentioning, which is basically public space in the air, in the sky. It's above the ground.
So we haven't developed yet the bigger spaces in our project because we focus on the smaller regular unit so far, but I think we will spend a lot of time to develop it after this midterm, just like this afternoon.
Yeah.
If I was just going to add to Dwayne, I appreciate your project. I think it's moving in a good territory. A couple things was missing for me that I needed to look up is one, I know this area of Boyle Heights, and I just wanted to make sure what you were tearing down, and it's just a manufacturing company, textiles. So I think it might be useful to show that at some point, just to that we know that you're not tearing down the local community, because there is a socio-political discourse there. And then I might also add that the amount of groundwork, this kind of looks like a parking structure. The section was a good section to look at for what I'm saying. It seems like all this hard work on creating a building above the ground, you do so much damage into the ground. And I'm not really sure, the outdoor space is fantastic, but then you have a lot of these like, looks like mean parking lots. And I'm just not sure all that's necessary for the territory, the conversation that you're trying to make, you know, where you show the mass transit, you show kind of a different kind of world lifestyle, the massive underground parking structure where we can't breathe, you know, ironically is probably, it just seems like a lot of infrastructure that might not be needed to sell your design. That would be my only real, you know, comment. Of course, there's the Cedric Prices and the Archigramms and all these people who've come before, but I think you're making a really great argument for how that may be so necessary today. So yeah.
I think it's, for me, I just see like such a rich historical lineage that I think maybe you could briefly touch on in your final presentation for this project. So if you think back to, you know, I mean, this is really, it's kind of like the Maison Domino on steroids a little bit. It also has some connection to some of Viollet-le-Duc's experiments with how to just extend structure and materials to create a kind of a framework for future living in his own time in the 19th century. And, you know, if you go back and think about how Le Corbusier structured his argument, you know, it was an argument against the tubercular basement and toward living in sort of fresh air and sunlight. And I appreciate the aside from the references to Cedric Price, or I can think maybe of some of the Team 10 ideas of kind of like this giant infrastructure into which individual dwellings are slotted. I think maybe where you guys could add to this legacy, which is such a rich legacy in architecture, would be to really carefully consider the in-between spaces that happen because of the frame, within the frame, under the frame, above the frame. I totally agree with Stephen.
Yes.
That you have to actually get out of the typical thinking about parking and vehicular kind of access in such a futuristic project. The only other thing that I would say, and I truly appreciate the completeness of this work. I mean, it's really, you guys have done an amazing amount of work and it's just lovely to see. So kudos to you. But the thing that I would say for your final material is that I think you need to unify your graphics. There are a lot of different types of presentation, a lot of different looks. Colors change. Sometimes it's hot pink, sometimes it's more diagrammatic colors, and it can be hard to track because of that. I think if you could unify the way you present graphically, it would just strengthen the legibility of your work.
Thank you.
And I wanted to just agree with the last comments. And I think we've looked at 3 or 4 projects now, and this is a very different kind of project, as was just pointed out. It's, I want to say grown up, but I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean it in a positive sense, because it seems to be cognizant of a whole range of content issues and the operational consequences that are plausibly making it a buildable piece of architecture, regardless of the, I think, constructive comments about the in-betweens and the public spaces and the efficacy of garages. And I think those are things that we all know. It's incredibly ambitious and it's incredibly energetic. And I think more than anything else, the motivation of the students to go and go and go and dig and dig and interrogate at that scale in various levels of content and detail and drawing typologies. And I'd like to commend the students. I think it sets an interesting example, at least as a way that work might be presented, which is extremely positive.
Well, I would concur. It's really an impressive piece of work. I have just one comment, which might be seen as trivial, but the dynamic planning in the site, which is very dynamic with the freeways, and then to impose a dynamic planned grid structure, asymmetrical as it is, on that site, no problem with that. But then to do the grid as basically very regular or almost regular, it seems to me that you really are missing an opportunity by varying the grid structure with regard to bay sizes and depths, that you really begin to make the basic structure of the project have a dynamic, expressive quality, which it's really lacking right now in terms of its basics. So I think that, you know, that it's probably way too late to do that, but I think in general, tying in the sort of expressiveness of the structure with the expressiveness of the planning, and with the possibility that that expressiveness opens up in terms of scale and size of functional spaces, I think could be a contribution to the project.
Boy, might it be that the grid serves as a datum for all of the other variety that occurs by the smaller elements moving around?
Yeah, sure, it could. But right now, in terms of the drawings, it suggests, and I understand why, but it suggests that the grid is still very, very dominant.
Yeah.
And it's very passive, I think.
I agree that one of the most interesting things about this site is the fact that it's very difficult to locate where exactly that ground datum is. And what I think the grid is allowing you to do right now is puff that datum into a whole bunch of different volumetric sort of landing pads or places to grab onto with your structures and your kind of pockets of habitability. So it's true. I understand what Koy is saying, and I think that could be one interesting direction, but you could also think about it the other way, that the grid simply multiplies the way that you can attach and the way that you can inhabit, to the point that you actually are able to discover, I don't know, like an entirely new way of relating to gravity, let's say. It's always been kind of a weird subtext to the whole, pilotis, domino, team 10, kind of let's stack things up. Even the MVD-RV kind of little folly that they did, that was also a stack project. And maybe it's time to fully investigate that.
It's interesting.
You could also argue for a ramp or a Broadway type diagonal to the grid, something Rem Koolhaas might add to allow more freedom of access and movement without undermining.
I just think right now the grid, because of its regularity, it doesn't excite the imagination with the potential that everything else in the project does. There's a disconnect there, I think, in terms of that. I think that's, to my mind, it's a shortcoming to the project, which would make it really truly brilliant if that frame was more expressive, had more variety.
This section, in particular, talking about the grid, I'm wondering what it looks like the gridded building is in the distance, and then what we're cutting through in the ground is another building on another site. And then there's basically a hard line that connects them. You can see the lines that are passing through the structure below, but I'm wondering what the transition might be. How does the bottom transform into the top? For the last 3 months, I've been sitting at a big table in my yard underneath a 125-year-old oak tree that is, from different angles, it's just constantly, it goes from something that is very sort of predictable, if you will, a gigantic trunk, but it's constantly changing as it's going up. So it's got a lot of variety in it. I don't see this. I like the grid itself. I'm wondering how it meets the sky and how it meets the ground, is really the only two things for me.
I have some questions also on the extents of this project, how you've cited it and how you chose to bound it in different ways or to fragment the edges also using the grid that you've established. So first of all, it's just fantastic to see some plans and sections and this sort of legibility where we can really get into the project with the line drawings. And then, yeah, I'm really just, you're dealing with this interchange, right? And, you know, Boyle Heights is bounded by these highways. East LA interchange is one of the largest interchanges in the US. So the proximity to the highway, I think, is questionable. And the kind of the scenario in which you would imagine this occurring, I'm wondering if you could get even more radical in terms of colonizing and taking over adjacent spaces, or considering the obsolescence of this infrastructure, the way it's cut these communities apart when it was built in the 60s, and how you're kind of establishing a new connection between these different neighborhoods and districts. So I think if you really consider how this meets the ground and how the edges of the grid and the larger, more linear structures relate to these totally different neighborhoods on the other side of the river, it could become quite interesting urbanistically. LA River is also right there. And there's a lack of open space in these districts, as highly paved. It's among, among the hottest areas in East LA. So really using the voids in the plan too, or thinking of this as a landscape on structure, where you can really begin to program the larger planes and ramps and in between spaces of the project. And you could really spend actually quite a lot of time on that in terms of the design development. And then, yeah, maybe drawing some relationships to the last project. I'm intrigued in these, the way the conversation has evolved in the reviews in terms of talking about historic preservation or critical conservation, or this kind of like much more radical adaptation. And your project is much more focused on the architecture than you've designed rather than the site that you found. But in fact, you chose a highly specific site and you're dealing with this infrastructure. So what is the scenario of this project? What kind of timescale are you dealing with? Is this vision meant to be implemented immediately, or is it, is this 50 years down the line? Are we going to have, bus rapid transit and we don't need as many lanes on the highways? How are these surrounding neighborhoods transforming? Is also issues of gentrification here. So I think you could, aside from the formal considerations, building this sort of temporal scenario or relationship to the site that you've chosen and the existing infrastructure could really make it quite interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, a lot of great comments. Pin and Faye, do you have any final thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I think that's it for now. We would like further develop after midterm. This conversation is really helpful. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for doing such great work.
Thank you. I am gonna stop sharing our screen.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and the next and final student is ChiAn Liao. Chih.
This will make you happy, Helen. Look at that title.
Back to nature? That's okay. I like infrastructure too.
Well, Corey, this is SCI-Arc, so back to nature could have lots of different meanings, as we all know.
Are we supposed to be hearing sound? I don't hear anything.
Chih, are you speaking? We're supposed to be hearing sound, yeah.
Good call, Marika.
Let's turn the audio off.
His audio looks like it's on. He's Chih, can you hear me?
I don't think they have sound.
No. I mean, it's 3 o'clock in the morning where he's at.
Yeah, it's not an option on their.
Chih?
You can chat with them maybe.
Or maybe you can call in from a cell phone.
Oh, she can hear us.
That's worked if we can't hear her.
I think Chih can hear us. It's a.
Yeah. Okay.
Gonna try. She's gonna call.
Oh, he's gonna try his phone. Yeah.
Whose student is this?
Mine. Roto.
It's Chih. Yeah.
How many more students do we have?
This is the final one.
Just curious.
Is that a real image on the right?
Not a real image.
Yeah, he can explain it, but oh,
That's
a
Is that a real thing?
Yeah, that's a project from
yeah.
Ensemble. What are they?
Yeah, Ensemble Studio.
Yeah, Deborah.
At the risk of saying something different than he would say, yeah, he found a number of projects that he would consider natural objects, architecture, and then looking at nature, going backwards, looking at nature, and then moving forward to try to develop a system for himself. This isn't a system that he would propose for everybody, but a system of basically finding and developing form that areas.
Okay.
Chih, can you? Okay, speak. Can we hear you?
Yeah, I can hear. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. All right. So why don't you can start.
Okay. So yeah, I'm interested in a building that is the people with different background culture can immediately impress because of its ambiguous but recognizable form that provoke people's imagination of the building. And so so the general feature of this kind of building are the purity of the form without any distractive artificial element on the facade. And there's no limitation of the scale and the form. So here is the, so the system I came up involved 3 major parts: the form, the facade, and the space. So on the left side, you can see the form of the tree, and the top one is most distinctive form, and from top to down is less distinctive, and the middle one is abstraction, and then back to the shape and the line, and the middle diagram showing the facade, the material. The top one shows the relative material with the reference. So you can see the tree has the green color on the top and the brown color on the bottom. So that's what the diagram showing. And the middle one is showing the absence of the facade. And in this case, this blank actually strengthen the existing of the form, and the bottom one is the contradiction of the material contradict with the reference, and the right side showing the relation between the form and the space. So the top one diagram showing the form of the building serve as a shield. So there's no like consistency between the form and the inner space, and the bottom one showing the consistencies. So here are the so here different color represent different style of building, and different combination come up with different types of building. So the red one is the, I call it realism style, and the blue one is ambiguous style. The green one is geometric style. The yellow one is phenomenal style, and the light blue one is the shape style, and the purple one is the concept style. And here are the cases that associate with different styles. So here's a close up to the cases. Some of them are real case, some of them are the proposal case that haven't been built or fail in the competition, and some are my imagined drawings. So you can see on the top six, these buildings are in the realism styles, so, which means when you look at this building, you can immediately understand what's their reference. And on the second part, they are belong to ambiguous building. So you know they are some kind refer to the natural object, but there's more than one possibility what they can be. And the green part showing the geometric style buildings. So they are strongly respond to their environment outline. So you can see the first one, the reference for the first one is the mountain line. The second one is the geographic of the building, and the phenomenal style that they're representing a natural rule. So they can be the gravity, the load, or the scale. They're just showing the phenomenon. And the light blue style, they represent the shape, they emphasize the shape. So you can see the clear shape of the building, which is the purpose of this design. And the last part is the bottom one are all the concept buildings, which they only make sense in certain location. So the first one is the well, and this one is located on a seashore. So when you look at this building, you can immediately understand what the building trying to represent the movement of the whale tail, the bubble, the sunset, the Sydney Opera House representing the sailboat, strongly respond to the sea. And yes, and here's the more detail of this diagram. So I kind of generate the formula that help me to understand that developing based on my insights from all these cases. And here's a close-up of the formula. So realism style, and to design something realism, I need to start to analyze the reference form. So if the reference form has a distinct this distinct feature, then the material has to be the blank one, which is the absence of material, and also the space can be totally separate, which means the form serves as a shield or have separate, which is composite structure. All this this line, they are developing from what my understanding and from the previous cases, and they all fit in this formula. And here are some of my attempt of using this formula. This formula helped me to influence my thinking process, and or at least it set up the rules or restriction for me to design something that either realism, ambiguous, or geometrical, and others. So, for example, firstly, I look at the rock, and I analyze its form. I analyze the form of the rocks and the materials, and also when I'm doing the drafting, I think I also think about the iceberg. Then I also doing analyze the form of the iceberg, and what the material might be to represent the reference, to represent the facade of the reference. And same as when I'm looking at the sea wave, I came up with these two shapes, and these two shapes, and here is represent here the process showing how I transform this pure shape into an ambiguous building. The draft showing how the process turned into an ambiguous building, and this becoming a shape category can be in the shape category because of this clear elegance shape and the sunset. So when I'm like doing all this drafting, I was thinking like what can be next, what can be like the improvement from all these styles. So there are three possibilities I can improve them for realism and ambiguous style building. What if I make the space consistency, like the pattern of the facade becoming an inner space? And you can clearly see like in this diagram the realism category and the ambiguous category, that none of them have come to like this consistency.
Chih, you're going to lose us if you keep talking about the diagrammatic issues. You're going to lose us. You got moving.
Sorry.
I think. Yeah, Chih. I think we.
I think you might have lost us. I drifted away. Can you go to the end of your what you're doing with all this?
Okay. Yeah. So I was thinking what can be next for the improvement of this type of building, and here is for hybrid. I think I was making a building that was a combination of the tree trunk and also have the elegant shape coming from the shape category. So the form of the tree trunk has the elegant shape, but it also has the feature of the form itself has representing a tree trunk, and the inner space has a layer, which also you can find out on the tree trunk. The geometry of the tree trunk has a layer, so I'm trying to make the inner space consistent with the geometry of the tree trunk, and yeah, this is. And yeah, I think I might do two of this kind of design. One is this hybrid, and another one might be one of them, like can be this one or the iceberg. That's it. Can you repeat?
Okay, let's open it up for discussion.
So you've essentially generated a system for yourself for generating analogies or associative understanding of form. Is how I would understand that. And if this is your thesis, I think you're going to need to demonstrate how powerful this is for you personally. Doing one or two things is not going to do it. You probably need a minimum of 7 iterations of showing how this kind of analysis has been very productive for you. Because you show me one thing or two things and I don't need all this diagram. But if you show me multiple examples of it schematically like you have, then I'm convinced of, number one, your grasp and how this intellectual exercise you've gone through has increased your fluency and flexibility. Because that's ultimately what you're trying to achieve for yourself, is gain a set of strategies for thinking and observing and generating that is highly productive for you. So you have to show us how productive it is. And so my recommendation is show us 7, not 1, not 2, but 7.
I would argue that your construction of an argument is a tough one. It reminds me a lot of social science in that you establish a series of terms, concept, ambiguity, which I like ambiguity, phenomenal. You go on to diagram what you think it means as if it's a truth and fact. And then you create all these interconnections, which are dubious but interesting, and arrive at some conclusion that I would go right to your original and question all of that to begin with. So I think you started great. And I'm looking at ambiguity and this notion of a recognizable form. I thought that was a great start. I was really excited. And then the long journey through your abstract thinking was too troubling for me. So I kind of had a hard time with it. And then you come down to the tree trunk, which is interesting, actually. I don't know if it has a purpose. I don't know if it has a program. I don't know where it's sited. I don't know why you've designed it in its location. There's so many ambiguities that I'm left wishing for more of your study without the diagramming of thought. Personal opinion.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Coy on part of it and take a different position on something else. I think that I really like the topic of study, which is essentially looking at degrees of abstraction, but specific to geological forms and related environmental issues. I do think that you spent way too much time going through the diagrams. I think we got it literally 5% of the way into your presentation. We knew what the topic was. It's helpful to know that you've categorized them in certain ways. And so I'm glad to see that you've done that, but you talked about it way too much, way too long. I think that it would be helpful to do a number of these to understand there are different ways into it and that your criteria is playing out and helping you make decisions. But I would use those 7. I would use the criteria to then select one of those 7 to move forward with. So you do 7 very quickly, like in 2 or 3 days, and then you spend the rest of the semester developing one of them. The reason I say it has to be developed is because that tree trunk, what's nice about it is it has multiple ambiguous interpretations. If you'd asked me what it was, I wouldn't have said tree trunk. I would have said it was a sort of registration of either water or wind or some kind of environmental condition. And I think that's the success, is that the abstraction you're looking for has readings, but they're different for different people. But if you, for example, apply materiality to that, or you try to punch an opening in it, you try to open the top and bring light in, you try to get air in, all the things that architecture needs. The minute you make a decision about one of those, it instantly changes the interpretation again. And I think having to grapple with the realities of materiality and openings and all of that is something that this is much more sophisticated than simply saying the overall form is the key to understanding what this project is about. So I'd encourage you more to focus on one, but I do think there's a value to using your criteria on multiple.
Yeah, I think at this point, you don't have much more time to work on this thesis. We're coming down to the end of stretch, which is after midterm. And I really like some of the provocations that Eric was posing earlier about maybe it's time to rethink how much time we spend sort of formatting these things for a gallery-ready presentation when that really isn't the end result of architectural exploration. However, usually at this time after midterm, people turn to production, or at least they're more concerned with how best to express the work that they've already done. And for you, I see actually that your work is really just beginning. So I would say that just based on the time that you have left to work, choosing one thing that you can focus on as a case study that would maybe express your larger position of how one does, quote, back to nature, end quote, in 2020 would be the most practical way forward.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to be the landscape architect and talk about process because I'm on the one hand, I'm fascinated with the idea of transforming these stones and trunks and objects of nature you've found into buildings. On the other hand, the way you've made these, I think, hand drawings of the mostly, for example, the geological forms you found begins to reveal the underlying process of their formation. So I'm curious if you could also begin to make some material analogies in the way you move forward with your trunk building in terms of thinking of things like weathering, erosion, I don't know, like glaciation. I'm not sure, how far maybe you could take this, or if it would really just be a material, like real specificity in the material translations and choices beyond the form you're beginning to specify. But yeah, this reform also reminded me a little bit of thinking about water, how water might move over this object. So yeah, I'm intrigued by the processes of formation associated with the natural world in the forms you've discovered or chosen, as well as the form themselves as it's like an outcome, a process of formation or an outcome of a natural process acting on stone, for example.
So Chih, just to clarify what Helen is mentioning, is process isn't your diagram. Process is how, and specifically, how does a tree trunk change over time? Basically, the impact of all of the forces on it, shrinkage, how the material deals with not enough water, too much heat, and so the material itself begins to transform. And so, how does that? How does materiality enter into the discussion? Which I think you're thinking about. I think that's an important point. What are your what thoughts do you have right now after hearing what you heard?
Yeah, actually, I did try like several design cases. I think like I have more than 7 like in here or either in here, like this month, these 2 my I didn't put the process joining on the bottom, but like these 2 has and this one, like I think I have like more than 7 like design that I was doing like based on my drift, but I can like make them more like developing like what I did on this tree trunk, and I can like demonstrate them under this formulate showing like this formula actually working, because I generate all these buildings that I have to do on my draft.
I think what Corey brought up the point, which is a really good one, is to show others that your system works, how it works, and the fact that it does work, and how you interpret it. And you have done a lot of sketching, that's evident. But how do you draw? How do you format these sketches so that it's not just part of the analytical process, but now it's part of the generative process? You know, so they have.
Yeah.
So, go on.
I'd also just recommend getting back into the computer, because the one that you've modeled is actually quite exquisite. So if you could quickly kick out a few more of these, translating your sketches into digital models and or further develop the one that you started, it will give you something else to present for your project.
Yeah.
Derived from this study.
Do you agree with that, Chih?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. All right. So I think that's a wrap. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, students, for all of the hard work. You know, the one thing that conversations with students that they really miss, they're all conditioned to work really, really hard. I think they naturally been doing that. They probably came out of the womb working hard. But I think the way we've pushed them, for sure, has developed that. The one thing that is, it can't really be measured except in output, is that they all say that when they're sitting at school amongst all of their colleagues and friends, they can feel the energy in the air, just like Wi-Fi, and they're missing that. And so I think I commend all of the students finding the way to develop the energy in order to produce the amount of work that you know is expected of you, and with the depth of thinking that you know that's expected of you. So, and,
well said. We all miss that feeling.
yeah, I know we do. And as I sit here alone in my studio, you know, I'm catching your vibes, though, you know.
I'm sending them your way, man.
See you in the morning on your coffee run. Hey, that was good. Yeah. Everybody do that. Come on, let's send each other vibes.
Good job. Good job, Michael.
So, all right, everybody. See you soon. Love you all.
Nice to meet you.
Stay safe.
Thanks. Yeah, nice to meet you all. And good luck to the students.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's see who goes. Click, click, click.